This lesson is on standard form of linear functions where you have two variables in the first degree added together that equals a constant. If you are the sub, please pause this while students are writing the title of the notes. Please pause while the students write down these notes. Okay, students, we are continuing our study on linear functions. We've seen that a linear function can be represented by a linear equation. Remember that all linear equations will only have variables in the first degree, which means that you will never have a variable that's squared, cubed, or to a power of anything that's beyond 1. A linear equation is an equation that can be written in the standard form of ax plus by equals c. Now, in this equation, x and y are your variables. So make sure you write that down. And then a and b are just coefficients of those variables. C is what we call a constant, and a constant is just an integer. It could be positive or it could be negative. If you are the sub, please pause while this page is copied down by the students in their notes. Okay, students, so basically what we're going to do is we are going to solve some problems when we have preset values for x and or y. So we're going to start with some really basics. We're going to start with x is -1, 0, 1, and 2. We're going to substitute those into the equation up here, okay? And then we're going to solve those for y, get an ordered pair, and then plot those on the graph. So here's how that works. So we're going to start with 5 times -1 plus y equals 10, okay? And so when we do that, we end up with a -5 plus y equals 10. And then we're going to add 5 to both sides. Solve for y. So when we add 5 to both sides, these 5's cancel out. Y is equal to 10 plus 5, which is 15. Now we're going to do the same thing with all of these values. So when I plug these in, I'm going to find that 0 is going to be equivalent to 10 for y. So when I input it, x is 0, y is output is 10. When I put in a 1, 5 times 1 plus y equals 10. So now I've got 5 times 1 is 5, plus y is equal to 10. And now I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, right, to solve for y. So these 5's cancel out. Y is equal to 10 plus 5, or minus 5. 10 minus 5, which is 5. So when x is 1, y is 5. And then I'm going to finally do the same thing with 2. I'm going to plug in a 2, substitute a 2 in for x, plus y equals 10. And so now I'm going to have 5 times 2 is 10, plus y is equal to 10. So now I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides, and I'm going to find that y is 0. So now I'm going to take these ordered pairs right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot those on a coordinate plane. So -1 and 15 is way up here. 0 and 10 is way over here. 1 and 5 is right here. And 2 and 0 is right here. So basically what you're going to have is you're going to have a pretty steep line there that is caused by this equation 5x plus y equals 10. Sub, please give them a few minutes to write these things down. Sub, please give them a second to write down this question, the equation, the table of values, and the graph. Now that you're done pausing, what we can see here is determine whether the equation is linear. If so, graph the function. So what we see here is we actually see a squared. Anything that's squared is not linear by definition. And so that is pretty much where we would stop. If we see anything squared or anything to the third power or anything at all to any power besides just x or y or z or a or b or c, we have anything besides just straight letters, it is not a linear equation. So determine whether the equation is linear. This equation is not linear. We can move on to the next problem. So sub, please give them a few minutes to write everything down. All right, so now we're going on to the next problem, the next example. So here we determine whether the equation is linear or not. If so, graph the function. So again, what we see here is we see that something is squared. Okay, if something is squared to the third power, any power at all, okay, we know that that equation is not linear, and there is no need to go ahead and graph it if it's a linear function. So because it's not a linear function, we can move on. So sub, give them a moment to go ahead and copy this down before moving on to the next slide. All right, so we are now ready to move on to the next slide, a check for understanding. And so we are to determine whether the equation is linear. If so, graph the function. Well, we can see here that this x and this y are not to the power of anything, so it's more than likely going to be linear. So we're going to go ahead with a table of values, a -1, a 0, a 1, and a 2, and then we're going to use those x's to solve for y. So I'm actually going to do this work over here so that I have a little bit more room. So basically what we have here is that we have a -1 minus, and I just plugged in -1 for x, minus 2y equals 2. So this is -1 minus 2y equals 2, and then we're going to add 1 to both sides to get y all by itself. We get -2y is equal to 3, and then we're going to divide by -2. So when x is -1, y is -3/2, which is -1 1/2. And now when x is 0, minus 2y equals 2. Now I can just divide this by -2 because this x 0 is just 0. And now when I divide that by a -2, y is -1. Then I can do this next one, which is x is 1 minus 2y equals 2. So this time I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides to get y all by itself and solve for y. So now I'm going to have y is equal to -1/2. And now finally I'm going to plug in a 2. So x is 2 minus 2y equals 2. So now I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So now I've got -2y is equal to 0. 0, and then I'm going to divide by a -2. So 0 over anything is just 0. So now I've got these four ordered pairs. I'm going to go ahead and plot these now on the graph. So I've got -1 for x and -1/2, which is about down here. I've got 0 and -1. So x is 0, -1 is right here. Okay, I've got 1 and -1/2. So -1/2 is right about there. And I've got a 1 there for x, and then 2 and 0 is right here. So this is going to form a linear function, or a linear line across that particular graph. So that's the graph of the function x minus 2y equals 2. All right, if you have any other questions, please see me when I get back. In the meantime, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and pause if you were the sub so that students can write this down, then move on to the next slide. All right, now that we've written all that down on Check for Your Understanding, we are going to summarize what you learned today. about graphing standard equations on a table of values. So you're going to write what you learned today in 3 to 5 sentences. Go ahead and do that. Sub, please pause the video while you wait for students to write for a couple minutes. Thank you. All right, Sub, now that students have finished writing their summary, let's move on to the assignment. So this is the assignment. What I need you to do is write down the equation, and what you're doing is determining if the equation is linear. If it is a linear equation, then you're going to graph the function. And then in number 18 right here, okay, you're going to state whether the equation is in standard form or not. And remember, that's any x plus y or ax plus by equals a constant, which is just an integer. Remember, you cannot have anything squared or to any power in this particular case. All right, so Sub, I need you to pause the video at this point and display this for the remainder of the period. Thank you.